How could you? I screamed, my voice shaking as it echoed across the desolate lot where our family home once stood. The place that had held so many cherished memories was now reduced to nothing more than a heap of rubble. Standing by his sleek BMW, Trent casually sipped from his Starbucks cup, his gaze fixed on his phone, completely unfazed by the devastation around him. Slowly, he looked up, nonchalant as ever. "Oh, hey, babe. You're back," he said, his tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "While you were off doing your self-care thing at that retreat, I took care of a little house project for us." I froze, my breath caught in my chest, disbelief and anger coursing through me. "A little project? Trent, you demolished our home. The place we raised our kids. The house Mom cherished. Gone without so much as a word to me." Shoving his phone into his suit pocket, Trent strolled toward me, his presence as smug and overbearing as ever. "Eliza, let's be real. That old place was falling apart. We needed a fresh start. Besides," he added with a smirk, "your inheritance can cover the cost of building a new modern home. Something fitting for us." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My inheritance? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't about a house, is it? You did this to get your hands on my money," I said, my voice shaking. "Our money," he corrected, his tone darkening. "That's what marriage is about, Eliza, sharing. Or at least it's supposed to be. I've been patient, but I'm done watching you squirrel away every dime. You owe me. I've given you everything, the cars, the club membership, college savings for Lucas and Sophie. And this is the thanks I get." I stared at him, unable to comprehend how the man I once loved could stoop so low. The man who had been my partner, the father of my children, now felt like a stranger fueled by greed. "You gave this family what a husband and father are supposed to give," I said, my voice rising with fury. "Meanwhile, I worked long hours teaching, managing the kids, and keeping us afloat while you played CEO at dinner parties. Don't act like this is some great favor you've done me." Trent's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. "Let's not kid ourselves, Eliza. One of us had to make real money, and it sure wasn't you. Teaching second graders isn't exactly a lucrative gig." His words cut deep, years of belittlement boiling to the surface. Without thinking, I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed in the stillness, a sound that carried all the pain and betrayal I had been bottling up for years. He stared at me, stunned, as I stepped back, tears streaming down my face. This was the man I had promised forever to, yet all I could see now was the shattered remnants of trust and love. For a moment, his face betrayed genuine shock, but it quickly twisted into a venomous smile. "You'll regret that, Eliza," he snarled, spinning on his heel and marching toward his gleaming car. "That inheritance is mine. You can either make this easy or make it messy, but I will get what I'm owed." I stood frozen amid the ruins of my life, my mother gone, my family home reduced to rubble, and my husband now a stranger fueled by greed. The years I'd poured into my family, the sacrifices I'd made, they meant nothing to Trent. To him, I was just another asset to manipulate. I sank onto a broken slab of concrete where our living room once stood, clutching a fragment of drywall etched with Lucas's childhood height measurements. The weight of loss pressed on my chest. Trent believed I would fold under his threats, just as I had so many times before. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. Losing Mom had changed me. Life was too fleeting to waste being cowed into submission. Clutching the piece of drywall like a talisman, I made a silent vow. Trent has underestimated me for the last time. If he wanted a fight, I would give him one. For myself, for Lucas and Sophie. For the life I'd built and refused to relinquish. The tears dried on my cheeks as resolve replaced heartbreak. I pushed myself to my feet, the crunch of debris underfoot a steady reminder of the battle ahead. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who could help. "Claire? It's Eliza," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. "I hope you've got room on your caseload because I need the best divorce lawyer in the city." sitting across from Claire at a small coffee shop. I felt the weight of the past 2 decades pressing on me. The coffee between us had gone lukewarm as Claire leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Start from the beginning," she said softly, though her reputation as a legal bulldog preceded her. "Help me understand the full picture." I closed my eyes, dredging up memories I'd tried to bury. It was 1998. I was 23 and had just landed my first teaching job. Trent was this charismatic up-and-coming sales executive. He swept me off my feet. I traced the timeline in my mind. How we'd married within a year. How by 30, I had left teaching to be a full-time mom. It was always my dream to raise a family, I admitted, my voice tinged with wistfulness.
Trent supported that.
He wanted me home with the kids while he focused on his career. Claire nodded. "And your family? Were they supportive?" "They were wonderful," I said, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "My parents were my rock, especially when Trent was away. We were close, until 6 months ago when my dad passed away suddenly. Mom was never the same after that." "I'm so sorry, Eliza," Claire said gently. "How did Trent handle this difficult time?" My smile faded as anger bubbled up. He didn't. He grew colder, more impatient. He resented the time I spent caring for Mom and made cruel comments about me being distracted. Claire's pen moved swiftly across the notepad. "Did he provide any emotional support at all?" "None," I said, my voice tight. "If anything, he made it worse." I recounted the memory that still stung like an open wound. Mom and I sitting together, flipping through old photo albums, laughing and crying as we reminisced about Dad. Trent had walked in unexpectedly, his expression a storm cloud of disapproval. "Is this what my house has turned into? A pity party patch?" he'd said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Trent," I'd pleaded, "Mom just lost her husband of 40 years. Show some compassion." His reply had been as cold as ice. "And I've lost my wife to this endless mourning. Enough of this." He stormed off to the bar, leaving Mom's fragile smile shattered. That moment broke her spirit. I told Claire, my voice trembling. "We never open those photo albums again." Claire's brow furrowed, her pen pausing mid-sentence. "That kind of emotional neglect won't go unnoticed in court." "Eliza, keep talking. We need all of this on record." I took a deep breath, my thoughts drifting to the image of our destroyed home, the symbol of everything Trent had raised in his quest for control. "Trent is a man consumed by his own ego," I said, my voice firm. "He thought I would sit back and let him destroy everything I care about. But he's about to learn that I'm stronger than he ever gave me credit for." Claire leaned forward, a determined glint in her eye. "You've got more fight in you than most people I know, Eliza. Let's make sure Trent never forgets it." Trent smirked, clearly misinterpreting my calm demeanor as submission. He leaned back in his chair, exuding that infuriating confidence that had once seemed charming. "Good to hear," he said smoothly. "Because, Eliza, we both know this inheritance situation is complicated. You've been holding on to that money like it's only yours. But we're married. We're supposed to share everything, aren't we?" I clenched my hands under the table to steady myself, forcing an even tone. "I don't disagree that we need to sort this out. But let's clarify. What exactly do you think you're entitled to?" Trent's smirk widened, his arrogance on full display. "It's not about entitlement, babe. It's about fairness. I've provided for this family for years, worked my ass off to make sure you and the kids had everything. And now, with this windfall from your mom, it's time for you to pull your weight." I felt my anger simmering beneath the surface, but kept my expression neutral. "I see. So, by pulling my weight, you mean handing over my inheritance to fund your projects?" "Fund our projects," he corrected sharply. "Like rebuilding that old dump of a house into something we can actually be proud of. You're being selfish, Eliza. You can't seriously believe you're entitled to keep that money for yourself." His words hung in the air, dripping with entitlement. "Selfish?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. You mean selfish, like destroying the home I grew up in without even consulting me? Or like leveraging my grief to manipulate me into giving you control of my finances? Trent's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered, his tone hardening. Look, I did what I had to do. That house was a relic, and you were too emotional to see it. I'm just trying to make things better for both of us. Better for both of us, I repeated slowly, my voice tinged with disbelief. Is that why you think it's okay to use threats and lies to get your way? Trent's eyes narrowed, his veneer of charm slipping. Don't twist this, Eliza. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just transfer the money into our joint account, and we'll be done with all this drama. My heart raced as he walked straight into our trap. I stayed calm, meeting his gaze with steely resolve. Let me make something clear, I said, my voice steady but firm. That money isn't yours. It was left to me by my mother to protect my future and our kids' futures, not to bankroll your ego. And I'll fight to the bitter end to make sure it stays that way. Trent leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You think you're tough enough to go up against me? You're making a big mistake, Eliza. I can make your life hell. That's enough, a voice interrupted from the next booth. Claire stepped into view, holding her phone aloft. You've said more than enough, Trent. And guess what? It's all on record. Trent's face turned ashen. What is this? This, Claire said, her tone icy, is evidence. Evidence of your manipulation, your threats, and your coercion. Good luck explaining this to a judge. Trent shot to his feet, his confidence crumbling. You can't. I can and I will, Claire said sharply.
Now.
I suggest you leave before you dig yourself into an even deeper hole. Trent stormed out, his bravado shattered. As the door slammed behind him, I exhaled deeply, relief washing over me. You did great, Claire said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Thank you, I whispered, my voice shaky, but filled with newfound strength. For everything. Claire smiled. This is just the beginning, Eliza. But with this recording, we've got him cornered. You're going to come out of this stronger than ever. As we left the cafe, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known in years. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I truly believed I could win. Trent scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. Handle it? Like you've handled everything else lately, barely scraping by, always relying on others to bail you out? Let's face it, Eliza, you're not exactly the dependable type. I took a deep breath, refusing to rise to the bait. His insults were desperate attempts to regain control, and I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of rattling me. I appreciate your concern, Trent, I said, my voice icy but composed. But this is my responsibility. You don't need to insert yourself into every aspect of my life anymore. There was silence on the other end of the line, the weight of my words clearly hitting their mark. Trent was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't the pushover he had grown accustomed to. Fine, he said finally, his voice low and seething. But don't come crying to me when you screw it all up. I won't, I said simply, and hung up before he could say another word. As I ended the call, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of empowerment. Trent's attempts to undermine me no longer felt like insurmountable blows. They were the desperate flails of a man losing control. And with every interaction, I was reminded of just how far I had come from the timid woman he once manipulated so easily. Later that evening, I met with Claire to discuss the latest developments. Sitting in her sleek office, surrounded by the quiet hum of professionalism, I recounted Trent's outbursts. This is gold, Eliza, Claire said, her pen moving rapidly across her notebook. Every interaction we document builds a stronger case. His behavior is erratic, condescending, and downright abusive. A judge will see that. I nodded, though a part of me still felt the weight of it all. I just hate that it's come to this. We were supposed to be a team, Claire. A family. Claire leaned forward, her eyes full of understanding. Eliza, what you're doing now, standing up for yourself, protecting your mother's legacy, that's the strongest kind of family loyalty there is. You're honoring her memory by refusing to let him tarnish it. Her words gave me a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about the inheritance or the house. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the respect I had been denied for far too long. The next morning, I woke up to another slew of messages from Trent. Each one was more frantic and desperate than the last, a stark contrast to his usual arrogance. He was realizing he was losing his grip, and it terrified him. I deleted the messages without reading them, a small but satisfying act of defiance.
Today,
I wasn't going to let Trent's venomous words occupy even a moment of my thoughts. Instead, I spent the day meeting with the church to finalize the funeral arrangements. As I stood in the quiet sanctuary, surrounded by the warmth of my mother's community, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was where she had been happiest, and I was determined to honor her memory in the way she deserved. As I lit a candle in her name, I whispered a silent promise. I will see this through, Mom. I will protect everything you worked for, and I will come out of this stronger than ever. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Trent's cruel behavior had reached its peak, and with each passing moment, his true character was laid bare for all to see. He had crossed every line, burnt every bridge, and now, standing in the ruins of what had once been a marriage, I saw him for what he truly was, a man consumed by greed and pride, willing to sacrifice everything, even his family, to satisfy his own ego. The funeral solidified my resolve. Surrounded by the warmth of my mother's community, I felt the strength of their love and support, contrasting sharply with Trent's venom. His absence at such a sacred moment spoke volumes to everyone present. And though his cruelty lingered in my mind, the service reminded me of the love and kindness that had shaped me, the values my parents had instilled in me. The next day, Claire and I sat in her office, reviewing the mountain of evidence I'd collected against Trent. His text messages, his verbal threats, his blatant emotional abuse. It was all there. A damning portrait of a man who had let his ambition and arrogance destroy everything good in his life. You have a strong case, Eliza, Claire said, her voice steady and confident. We'll push for a swift settlement. Between the documentation and his clear pattern of abuse, I doubt he'll want to take this to court. I nodded, my hands gripping the edge of her desk. He'll try to fight. He's too stubborn to admit defeat. Claire smiled faintly, her eyes gleaming with determination. Let him. Men like Trent always think they're untouchable until the ground falls out from under them. We'll make sure he has no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Trent, true to form, tried every trick in the book to delay and derail the process. He filed baseless counterclaims, accused me of manipulation, and even attempted to turn Lucas and Sophie against me. But his efforts were in vain. The truth was undeniable, and with each hearing, his defenses crumbled further. Claire was relentless, countering his every move with precision and skill, leaving him floundering in his own lies. Through it all, I leaned on the support of my children and friends, finding strength in their unwavering belief in me. Lucas, despite his father's attempts to sow doubt, stood firmly by my side, his love and loyalty a beacon of hope in the storm. The day the divorce settlement was finalized, I stood in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge read the decision. Claire's strategy had paid off. Trent was held accountable for his actions, and I retained full control of my inheritance and the assets my parents had worked so hard to secure. Trent's face was a mask of anger and humiliation as the ruling was announced. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. He had lost, not just in court, but in life. His greed and selfishness had left him with nothing, while I, though battered and bruised, had emerged stronger than ever. That evening, I stood in the garden of the house that was now truly mine. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the world, as if nature itself was celebrating my victory. Lucas and Sophie joined me, their laughter filling the air as they recounted memories of their grandparents and our home. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The weight of Trent's control had been lifted, and I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms. Looking out at the horizon, I whispered a silent promise to my parents, whose love and guidance had brought me to this moment. "I'll honor your legacy," I said softly, my voice steady with resolve. "And I'll live the life you always wanted for me, one filled with strength, love, and freedom." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew my journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that I had reclaimed my life and my future. Driving away from the confrontation with Trent, my hands trembled slightly on the wheel. But my heart swelled with a growing sense of victory. For years, I had lived under the weight of his manipulation, his towering presence, and his thinly veiled threats. Today was different.
Today,
I stood firm and refused to let him crush me. Claire's words replayed in my mind. "Your courage is what's winning this." I hadn't fully understood that until now. For so long, I had believed I was powerless against Trent's machinations. But the truth was I had always held the strength. He just couldn't stand to see me use it. The next court hearing was just days away. Claire and I worked tirelessly to ensure every piece of evidence was in place. The recordings, the financial discrepancies, and the blatant emotional abuse, all of it painted a clear picture of who Trent really was. There would be no room for him to twist the narrative. That morning, as I dressed in a simple yet sharp black suit, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different. She wasn't the meek wife who quietly accepted being overshadowed. She wasn't the grieving daughter or the overwhelmed mother. She was a fighter, a protector of her family and her future. In the courtroom, Trent arrived late, as expected, his tailored suit and cocky smirk doing little to disguise the tension in his jaw. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on his lawyer, who looked equally exasperated. Claire leaned over and whispered, "This is it. Stay composed and let the evidence speak for itself." I nodded, my resolve steady. When the judge entered, the room hushed and the proceedings began. Claire presented our case with precision, detailing Trent's financial irresponsibility, his attempts to coerce me, and his outright betrayal. She played the recording of his threats from the cafe, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Trent's lawyer tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, but the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was too damning, too clear. When the ruling finally came, it was everything I had hoped for. I retained full ownership of my inheritance and assets, while Trent was ordered to pay compensation for damages caused by the illegal demolition of the family home. I was also granted primary custody of Lucas and Sophie, with strict visitation terms that prioritized their well-being. As the judge's gavel echoed through the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Trent's face was a mix of fury and disbelief. But for once, he had no power over me. The law had spoken, and justice was on my side. Outside the courtroom, Claire gave me a rare smile. "You did it, Eliza. You stood your ground and you won." I hugged her tightly, tears threatening to spill. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," she said firmly. "You just needed someone to remind you of your strength." As I drove home, the world felt brighter, the air clearer. The battle with Trent had been brutal, but it was over. I was free. Later that evening, as I sat in the quiet of my rebuilt life, Lucas and Sophie by my side, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a victory over Trent, it was a reclamation of myself. My voice, my independence, my future, they were mine again. And as for Trent, he could stew in his losses. His reckoning had come, and it was only the beginning of his fall. As I drove away from the courthouse, a wave of relief swept over me, mingled with a newfound sense of freedom. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, no longer shadowed by Trent's controlling presence. Each turn of the wheel felt symbolic, like I was finally steering my life in the direction I wanted. The day had been exhausting, but the outcomes were worth every moment of tension. My assets were safe, My children were under my care, and Trent's theatrics had only solidified the court's ruling against him. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of justice, of closure. Later that evening, I returned home to Lucas and Sophie. They were waiting anxiously, their faces lighting up when they saw my smile. "Mom, how did it go?" Lucas asked, standing protectively beside Sophie, who clung to her favorite stuffed animal. I knelt down to their level, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "It's over, kids. The judge decided that you'll stay with me, and we're going to be just fine." Sophie's small voice piped up. "Does that mean Daddy won't be mad anymore?" Her words broke my heart, but I hugged her tightly. "It means we're going to have peace, sweetheart. We're going to focus on being happy together." The next few weeks were transformative. I threw myself into rebuilding our home and our routines, creating a life that was filled with warmth and stability. Lucas and Sophie adjusted beautifully, their laughter slowly replacing the tension that had once hung over our family. As for Trent, he made a few half-hearted attempts to stir up trouble, angry emails, late-night phone calls, but with Claire's advice, I ignored his outbursts and let the restraining order do its work. His power over me had dissolved, leaving nothing but empty bluster. One sunny Saturday, I sat in the backyard with the kids, watching them build a makeshift fort from old sheets and garden stakes. For the first time in years, I felt at ease, the burdens of the past no longer weighing me down. Claire called as I sipped my coffee. "I just wanted to check in," she said. "How are things?" "Peaceful," I replied, glancing at Lucas and Sophie giggling together. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like we're free." "You deserve it, Eliza," Claire said warmly. "You fought for this, and now you're reaping the rewards." As I hung up, I reflected on how far I'd come. Trent had underestimated me, believing he could intimidate and control me forever. But I had proven him wrong.
Now,
As I watched the sunlight filter through the trees, I felt nothing but gratitude for my resilience, for the people who supported me, and for the chance to start anew. The road ahead wasn't just mine to travel, it was mine to pave. And I planned to make it beautiful. As our Uber sped away from the chaotic scene, the silence in the car was heavy, each of us processing what had just unfolded. Lucas stared out the window, his jaw tight, while Sophie clung to my arm, her wide eyes filled with worry. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is he going to be okay?" I sighed, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I don't know, sweetheart, but that's up to him now." Lucas finally broke his silence. "He's spiraling, Mom. I know he brought this on himself, but seeing him like that..." He trailed off, his voice thick with conflicted emotion. "I know, Lucas," I replied softly. "It's hard to watch someone you once cared about fall apart. But we can't let his choices pull us down with him." That night, as the kids settled in, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, replaying the encounter in my mind. Trent's venomous words still echoed, but instead of fear, I felt a profound sense of closure. His threats, his rage, it was all rooted in his inability to accept the consequences of his actions. Trent's downfall was tragic, yes, but it was also a lesson. Greed and selfishness had consumed him, leaving him isolated and disgraced. While I couldn't control his choices, I had reclaimed control of my life, and that was something he could never take away. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. Lucas returned to college, determined to focus on his studies despite the shadow of his father's collapse. Sophie thrived in her school activities, her laughter filling the house like a healing balm. One evening, as we sat around the dining table, Sophie looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Dad will ever change?" she asked. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I hope so, Sophie. But change has to come from within. We can't force him to see things differently." Lucas nodded in agreement. "We've done what we can, sophomore. Now it's up to him." Months later, I received a letter from Trent. The handwriting was shaky, the tone surprisingly subdued. He apologized, truly apologized, for everything. The lies, the manipulation, the destruction of our home. He admitted he was in rehab and working on himself. I read the letter twice, unsure how to feel. It wasn't an invitation for reconciliation, nor was it a plea for sympathy. It was simply a man acknowledging his wrongs, perhaps for the first time in his life. I tucked the letter away, not ready to respond but grateful for the glimpse of humanity it revealed. Maybe Trent's story wasn't over yet, but I had turned the page on that chapter of my life. Standing in my garden one crisp morning, I watched Sophie chase our golden retriever, her laughter echoing in the air. Lucas called from the porch, holding up a freshly baked pie he'd made as a surprise. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, full of love, resilience, and hope for the future. Trent's shadow no longer loomed over us. We were free, and that freedom was more valuable than anything he had tried to take away. As the sun warmed my face, I whispered, "Thank you, Mom. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. 1 year later, a year had passed since Trent's downward spiral reached its nadir, and our lives began to heal from the chaos he left behind. His drunken threats had dwindled into silence as court-mandated rehab took hold, forcing him to confront the anger and greed that had consumed him. From what Sophie shared, Trent had accepted a sentence at a rehabilitation center specializing in anger management and financial accountability. Whether genuine transformation awaited him there was uncertain, but his absence brought peace to our lives. With Trent's presence no longer looming, the once vacant lot where our family home had stood became a symbol of possibility. On a crisp, sunny Saturday morning, Sophie, Lucas, and I stood on the freshly cleared ground, ready to break ground on a new chapter, one built on strength, hope, and love. Claire, ever my steadfast ally, snapped photos of us smiling against the backdrop of bustling construction crews. Lumber stacked neatly nearby, ready to form the frame of a house that would carry no shadows of the past. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Sophie said, her voice brimming with warmth as she squeezed my shoulder. "This is where we start fresh." I nodded, my gaze sweeping over the lot where decades of memories had once flourished before being reduced to rubble. But now, every hammer strike and raised beam felt like a piece of our collective healing. Lucas enthusiastically discussed layout ideas, eager to infuse the new house with both practicality and personality. Trent's destruction had once felt all-consuming, a force too immense to overcome. But as I watched our new foundation take shape, it became clear his actions had not ended our story. Instead, they had given us the opportunity to rebuild stronger. The year of construction was one of physical progress and emotional renewal. Each wall raised felt like a reclamation of something stolen, each brushstroke of paint a celebration of resilience. By the time autumn arrived, the transformation was complete, a stunning contemporary farmhouse that blended the warmth of tradition with modern comfort. Family and friends gathered for a housewarming party on a golden fall afternoon. The new home buzzed with life and laughter as caterers circled with trays of champagne, and Sophie and Lucas proudly gave tours to their friends. Standing by the fireplace, I admired a mantel adorned with photographs of my parents, their smiles radiating love and strength. Though they were no longer with us, their spirit had guided me through every difficult moment. Not all absences at the celebration were mourned, though. Trent's parents had sided with him despite the overwhelming evidence of his manipulations, and their absence only underscored the distance they had chosen. As for Trent himself, he remained isolated, his pride keeping him from acknowledging the wreckage he had caused. Whatever hope I had for his redemption now rested solely in his hands. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Sophie joined me on the porch. We gazed up at the stars, their brilliance a reminder that even in the vast darkness, light endured. "Dad sent me a letter today," Sophie said hesitantly. "He said the counseling is helping him understand what he's done." I glanced at her, noting a mixture of hope and doubt in her expression. "That's encouraging," I replied carefully. "But real change takes time and commitment." Sophie nodded, leaning into my shoulder. "Even if he changes, I know where my real strength comes from now. It's here, with us." Her words filled me with pride. Despite everything, Sophie and Lucas had grown into compassionate, resilient young adults. They carried forward a legacy of love and strength, not bitterness. As we sat in the cool night air, I marveled at the journey we had taken together. The scars Trent had left would always be a part of our story, but they no longer defined it. Instead, they served as reminders of the resilience that had carried us through the storm. Looking at my children, I saw a future filled with promise, a garden of blooming flowers nourished by the lessons of the past. Together, we would continue to grow, unshaken by shadows, thriving in the light.